Now that there's 19 episodes in the story of From, we've definitely seen a lot of interesting things that have made us ask a lot of questions about what's actually going on in Fromland. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 of what I consider to be the worst possible endings for this series.
Look what I found.
Okay, where?
He was about a half mile eating some grass. There are chickens out there too. Tomorrow I'm gonna set up some traps.
There's chickens in the forest?
Yep.
Number 5, it's a futuristic prison. The argument for this one is actually really good, and there's a lot of stuff in the show that can be argued for this ending. For example, the animals being delivered to them in the forest is so that they'll be able to provide dairy and meat for the prisoners to make their own food with. The faraway trees aren't magical or mystical or anything like that, but they're simply teleportation portals made using wormholes or some type of similar technology, something that you may see in a show like Rick and Morty, for example. The monsters themselves are actually the uniforms of the prison guards, and their job is just to make life incredibly painful for the inmates. In this case, the inmates are the town residents, you see? This theory perfectly explains how and why the monsters already know everybody in the town, because the prison staff are the ones who booked them into the prison in the first place. It still leaves a lot of holes though, like what did Ethan and Megan possibly do to deserve being painfully tortured like that? Unless, of course, Ethan is actually a grown man who people just perceive as being a child due to some advanced tech shenanigans. But in this case, they also probably get implanted with fake memories once they get into the prison so that they won't know how to get out. It's an interesting idea and would explain many things that are going on in the town, like why they get free electricity.
Holy shit. What the f? Toby, you're a fucking genius!
Number 4, playtest for a futuristic video game. Because we already know that Jade and Toby were these super intelligent Silicon Valley tech geniuses, it could be that Fromland is something really similar to Ready Player One, a really advanced, almost completely realistic type of simulation that was made by Jade and Toby's company. It could be that they were sent into Fromland because the game somehow stopped working properly. Maybe the AI in the game became somewhat sentient, and that's what's causing the issues with the game. So Jade and Toby go in because of their intelligence. So they thought they'd just go in and fix whatever the issue might be, but in the process, they end up getting amnesia somehow. And so Jade can't remember that he was responsible for actually making the game. It would explain a lot of what's going on. The way the road loops around could simply be creative game design to not break the immersion of the game. Kind of like how in some games, instead of having an invisible wall that blocks the player, you just end up looping back to the main map where you came from. So, a lot of people have brought up the idea that if this is the case, it could be the symbol Jade keeps seeing is actually the symbol for his real world company, which is interesting to think about. And maybe he put it in like an Easter egg, that's interesting to think about. The infinitely spawning animals and the infinite electricity without any power grid is also something that's really common in gaming. The lack of the motel, the lack of the motel also gives off the vibe of, oh no, we overestimated our budget. We built the pool and the sign, but now we can't build the motel because there's no more money. And but they'll never notice that. It's fine. It's fine. Just keep it in the game. It also perfectly explains why Boyd just randomly found the talismans out in the hut in the forest, almost like they were placed there intentionally. And yeah, that would be the case if it's a video game. And the radio call was actually the developers stopping what's the equivalent of modders in an online video game. This ending would actually explain all sorts of weird occurrences that we've seen throughout the story.
Boy! Come back to me.
Number 3, he was in a coma. I'm sorry, Boyd, you've been in a coma for the last 20 years. Oh man, that would be a horrible ending. It would be a horrible ending, 100%. It's one of the worst, but I have to talk about this one because it's obviously very possible. Basically, this theory is the idea that everything we've been seeing up to now has been futuristic doctors in 2040, 2060, or in an alternate universe that's more advanced than ours that have been trying to wake Boyd up for the past few decades now. Using the absolute peak technology available, a new type of tech that was designed specifically to wake people up from their comas. The reason why the NPCs of Brian and Kelly were put into the simulation was an attempt to stimulate Boyd's brain by reminding him of the event that actually led him to being comatose in the first place, which was the explosion that happened when he was serving with Brian Kelly in Iraq. Victor is a fellow patient in the same hospital as Boyd. The same thing with Tilly and with Ethan. Dying is necessary for visitors to wake up, or else their brain won't be disconnected properly from the machine. And it's that same flaw why some people like Elgin gain selective amnesia when they enter the simulation. Martin was actually one of Boyd's commanding officers, and Abby and Ellis asked him to go into the simulation to help Boyd, but it didn't work because it takes a lot of power to put real people in the simulation, and Martin runs out of time before he can get Boyd to wake up. So Elgin is Boyd's grandson, and he was put into the simulation to help Boyd, but Boyd doesn't recognize him, which was what the doctors were hoping would happen. That's why when Boyd first sees Elgin, Elgin has this reaction.
I'm sorry, I stayed in the dark. I was scared.
Who are you?
What? I asked you a goddamn question. Elgin, my name's Elgin.
This one is definitely a more unique take on what's going on in Fromland, but it's still one that would leave a very bad taste in my mouth.
What did you really come here to ask me?
How do you know any of this is real? I mean, it sounds crazy, but are we dead? Are we alive?
Would it matter?
Number 2, and this one, oh man, they were dead all along, the purgatory one. Wow, if the writers have the balls to try this ending, they will get a level of hate they never imagined was possible. It would be biblical. I'm talking the worst insults you can think of 24/7. After the ending of Lost, pulling this ending off successfully requires a level of writing that isn't anywhere close to what we've been seeing on the show. I definitely don't believe the writers are capable of pulling this ending off without pissing off more than 80% of the fan base at this point in the story. Everything would be burned to the ground. The audience reaction for this show would immediately plummet to less than 30%, maybe even lower, maybe even 10%, because the ending of Lost left such a horrible taste in so many people's mouths. Yeah, I know technically the actual story of Lost actually happened in the show, but this ending would be horrible because of how people perceived what the ending actually meant, i.e., that none of it ever happened to begin with, which is actually the real problem people had with the ending. That actually brings us to the final entry of this list, and this is the worst possible ending this show could ever have.
You ever wonder if Abby was right?
Hey, what'd you say?
What if it's all just a dream?
The fuck?
Number 1, it was all a dream. Final episode of the series, titled The End. Boyd wakes up. He's still in Iraq. He picks up a notebook that he keeps in his bedroom. He opens the book and writes down a couple bullet points. Razor sharp teeth. Looks like humans. Afraid of talismans. He closes the book and leaves the barracks to go on patrol. This ending would bring scorched earth to everyone involved in the show. The amount of anger that the fans would feel is not something anyone connected to this show can handle. This would be the worst possible ending in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't a video game, it wasn't a simulation, and it wasn't even a coma. Nothing mattered. Zilch, zero. Everything was completely irrelevant. They never had any intention of answering any of the questions. They promised a satisfying conclusion, but the only thing you got and you will ever get is blue balls. This is a terrifying ending when you think about how possible it actually is. And it would be a shame for Ethan because his career is only beginning. And an ending like this for this show could easily be the nail in the coffin for his career, much like what happened to Anakin from The Phantom Menace. Obviously, I don't want that to happen to Ethan, but yeah, those are a bunch of endings that I know would leave a lot of people feeling very unsatisfied in the order of how unsatisfied people would be. Some are much, much worse than others. Some of them are even expected, but there's way better ways to end this show. And that is actually going to be the topic of the next video. So keep a watch out for that.